Hi, I'm Maeva, and this is Raising with the Village, a podcast where real parents share real stories so we can all feel a little more connected on this wild journey of raising children. Today's episode is a little different and a really important one. For the first time on Raising with the Village, we're hearing from a dad. And I may add, for the first time, but certainly not for the last time. Liam joins me to share his experience of becoming a parent from the co-parent's perspective. After the birth of his first baby, an unexpected emergency meant that both mum and newborn were transferred to another hospital, and Liam suddenly found himself navigating fatherhood from the sidelines. In this episode, he talks about finding his place, supporting his partner, and learning how to be a dad in the NICU. A perspective we don't hear often enough, but one that definitely deserves a space. Let's listen to Liam's story. Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. I will disclose it. You are the first dad on the podcast.
I feel honoured. Thank you.
So thank you for being here. So tell me, who are you?
So my name is Liam. I've got two children, two daughters, one who's 7 and the other who is 3.
Oh, okay. Is that a busy household?
Yes, very busy, always quite chaotic, but always lots of fun, as you know. But yeah, they keep us on our toes for sure.
Perfect. Today we're going to go back to the birth of your first child. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. It feels a long time ago, but also not a long time ago. It's very strange.
Let's go back to just before the pregnancy. I'm actually interested because, like I said, you're the first dad I'm talking to.
Yeah.
What was the thinking like for you when you and your partner thought, let's have a child? What was the thinking? Where were you coming from at that point?
So we had been together for quite a while, actually, before we decided to have a child. It's something that telling our daughters now is very strange to them. They can't imagine this kind of life that we had beforehand. But we were together for 10 years or more before we started to try. So we'd had this kind of, wonderful sort of life of holidays and, weekend breaks and lots of rest and sleeping in and so on. But I think, we knew that something was missing, but something that we just both wanted. And then when we found out, it was just amazing. It was I guess that feeling that everybody has when they first find out that, wow, this is really going to happen. So it was wonderful. And we were lucky, because, it was what we were sort of dreaming of, really. And, I know that it's not always like that for people, but, it was great. And we were just, so excited and thrilled and looking forward to it.
What was it like for you? What kind of came through your mind when you realized I'm going to be a dad? Did you think of your own dad? Did you think of any role models you had in mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my parents split up when I think I was about 2. I can't remember them being together. So the relationship I have with my dad has always been slightly not one of almost father and son, because we didn't live with him. I've got a stepfather who we always call by his first name. He's brilliant, but he's our stepdad. So they're both kind of fantastic role models, but also different from I thought what I was going to experience. So I therefore didn't really know, but also the kind of the generational difference, what the experience that they would have had being a father, and then for me and others of my generation or younger, it's a completely different experience. You're going to be much more hands-on. There are lots more things that you want to do but are going to be expected to do. I think back to my grandfather, who was sort of like notorious, but in the family as, I don't think he was there for the birth of any of his children. He was just found out in the pub, and, it was all very exciting for him. But um, I sort of thought this is not going to be the same for me. It's going to be a completely kind of different but exciting experience. And then for the kind of the sort of period of the pregnancy, it felt like getting ready, but trying to get as many things sort of done as possible whilst we still had the opportunity to do so.
What did you do? Did you take any classes? Did you read any books?
We did NCT, which was fine. I know most people who do NCT say, it's for kind of finding people who are going through the same thing. And I think that was the same with us. I don't think we really learned anything. I think the preparation was more, let's get stuff ready where we were living. We're living in a 2-bedroom flat at that point, but also let's try to do as many things as possible. And that was the advice that everybody gave to me, and the advice I give to expecting parents now, that go on holidays, take weekends away, just do whatever you can, try and fit in nights out together, because they'll become a lot more difficult. I think I had this idea that as soon as the baby was born, I would never go out again. That was my kind of view. I thought that was it. Whereas my partner would, she would say, don't be silly. Eventually, it will sort of go back to a bit of normality. So that year was, the 9 months were just us trying to kind of enjoy that time as much as possible. But I think I always thought that there was more time, and that was why it was a surprise when suddenly that the time I thought we had before the birth was suddenly cut short. And I thought, gosh, I'm not ready.
So what happened then?
So it was, I think, about 4 weeks, 3.5 weeks before due dates. So we were both, my partner's still working, and she had planned, I think, to have 2 weeks of maternity leave beforehand. But we were both still working. It was just a normal day. I remember going to my place of work that day, and then that evening just thinking about what I was going to do at work the next day. And there being kind of no expectation that anything was about to change at all. And, my partner was also the same. She was very busy at work, and it just felt a kind of a sort of a completely normal time. And then we went to bed, and then suddenly I was sort of woken up at, whatever it was, like 1 a.m. And my partner sort of running around going, I think something's happened. I think my waters have broken, but I'm not sure. And my instant thought was, of course they haven't. This is, I'm sure this is
way too early.
And of course you're kind of you're used to the idea that her sleep is very disrupted at this point anyway. It's very late, obviously, in the pregnancy, and I know it sort of obviously gets a lot more uncomfortable, and so you're kind of aware that that's what she's going through, and so getting up in the middle of the night is sort of not an abnormal thing to happen. But she was absolutely convinced that there was something that was different. So we then we got in the car, drove to the hospital. All the while I was thinking, we'll be back within half an hour. We'll turn up. They'll say, we'll have to wait for a bit. And then they'll say, it's nothing, but well done for coming in. But, you can go home now. So I thought, well, it's in the middle of the night, but it's okay. We'll be back in bed within an hour or so. We got to hospital, and they confirmed that indeed her waters had broken, and that that was, and even at that point I thought, well, we'll still be coming home. But such was because it was sort of too, I think, the timing of it, so that it was, it was 3.5 weeks. There are some times when they will just say you can go home and you can come back, but once they'd confirmed that the waters had broken, then the midwife said, "Okay, so we'll move you to the maternity ward." And this point, so I remember asking, "What? So you mean my partner's not going to come out until like we've had the baby?" And she was like, "Yeah, that's right. The next time she leaves this place, she'll have the baby." And I was utterly sort of shocked in that I'd fully expected us just be coming home within the hour, and then suddenly that was it. It was happening. It was, and it was just a kind of a matter of time then at that point.
So you had left the house, obviously, thinking you were going to come back. So you didn't have anything with you? No bags, nothing?
So we did have, so my partner's incredibly well organised and all very well prepared. She'd already prepared a bag, like a hospital bag with all the kind of essential things in there. So she had brought that, and so we were prepared in a way. I was still able to. I could then go home and get more stuff. So this was the kind of the night of the 30th of August going into the 31st. And then for the whole day, we were just waiting for something to happen. And they kept saying, well, we might kind of start the induction process at some point. But yeah, that's the position we were in at that point.
Okay. And so you mentioned that, that your partner stayed at the hospital, obviously,
yes.
But you quickly went back home, picked up more things, went back to the hospital. They tell you we'll start the induction process.
So, yes. So they, as anybody who's sort of, I guess, been in hospital, or particularly during the kind of the whole kind of maternity process, that things sometimes happen really quickly, and then sometimes nothing happens for ages. And for the whole of that day, nothing really happened. But I remember thinking, and the reason I mentioned the date is because that was important for me. So my daughter's due date was something like the 22nd of September. And I remember thinking, well, that means she's going to be the eldest in her year. That's a good thing. I'm quite happy about that. And then, of course, suddenly we're in hospital. It's the 31st of August. So for the whole of that day, I was thinking, can they just wait? Can they just hold off with the induction? Let's just give it a few more hours, which of course is completely ridiculous. And I also kept telling myself, no, it should be the right time. Whenever the right time is the right time. But I do remember thinking to myself, well, if they just wait until it gets to the 1st of September, she will be the oldest in her year. And, in my mind, that felt like a good thing. Of course, my second daughter was born in August anyway. So that's what I get for kind of thinking that. But,
that was feedback.
Yes. Yeah. But it was that as a kind of a vivid memory. And then I think they eventually started the induction. They tried a couple of different things, but they didn't start it until quite late that evening. And then, that's when things started to, even then they were quite slow, but then they sort of sped up quite a bit more after that.
So during the induction, where are you? What's your role, or do you even have a role?
Yeah, so we were moved to the maternity ward when the induction started. Now, even in my kind of mind, I know when somebody says maternity ward, I thought, well, that's just a ward with loads of other people on it. I didn't realize you got your own room. That was already a kind of a surprise for me. That of course you get your own room. But I thought everybody was just lined up in beds. But so we're in the room, and it's quite spacious. I'm surprised that it's it's all very nice. They've got various things that you can do, so my partner can sort of sit on the kind of the bouncing ball and things like that. They're supposed to help bring on baby. but I thought, well, my job is to make sure she's sort of as comfortable as possible, to get everything that's needed. I think I'd been back home again, and I'd been to the supermarket, and I'd like picked up like snacks and drinks and things like that. All the things that, you might forget about, but are essential. And again, my partner's like incredibly well organized, and she was like, go and get these things, bring them back. This is what we'll need. But also there's also just a lot of doing nothing, and and a lot of times where I sit there and think, I feel quite useless in this situation, that I'm not really doing anything. When her contraction started, that was when it felt, you feel even more kind of helpless, because you're seeing somebody that you love sort of start to suffer in this way, and then the contractions will stop, and she's suddenly back to normal, sort of talking away, and then they'll start again, and she's kind of like sort of paralyzed by this pain. But it's something that I remember thinking, I don't know what this is like, and I also don't really, apart from comforting and doing all the things that you should be doing to comfort, I thought, I don't know how helpful I'm being here, and that sort of continues quite a bit. You feel kind of a bit worthless, really, that you're not really doing anything. And then the midwives will come in, or the doctor will come in and just talk to mom or mom to be. And you're just sat there thinking, I could be any guy here who's just they don't care what I'm doing or thinking or anything like that. So it is tough, but it's also, you also know it's a million times easier than what she's going through at this point, which also makes you feel kind of quite bad in a way, that it's not, you're not going through the kind of the pain, you're not about to go through the pain that she's about to go through. So you're sort of grateful, but also you want to try to take some of that pain away, but you can't. So you don't feel like you're really adding anything.
How did the labor progress?
It was very slow at first. It took a long time. I sort of have gone through. I started a WhatsApp group with various family members, my partner's mom, my sister, my partner's sister, just to keep them all updated. And I was having a look through that before this, and it felt like the kind of the labour had gone for hours and hours, and then even after about 10 hours, it was sort of she was like 2 centimeters dilated, very, very, very slow. And I remember when they came round to measure the dilation and telling us, my partner was like, I can't believe it's only that amount. But it then sped up quite significantly. The kind of the thing that the sort of funny thing that again I remember from this is, of course, like you can bring your own music to play.
Mm-hmm. Oh, tell me you had good choice.
Well, of course, it's not my choice. So it's sort of, I think we're going out on Spotify. So, be pleased to hear that I was playing Spotify on my, through my kind of phone. And I think I don't know if we brought some speakers, but anyway. So my partner really wanted some like relaxing music. But music that meant a lot to her. So we put on Alicia Keys, but a kind of
I approve of this
sort of a shuffle of all her songs but because the labour went on for that long, the song started to repeat. So my memory of that is sort of being really tired because it's in the middle of the night. We're talking like 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. Alicia Keys are constantly playing in the background.
Keep on falling.
Yes, yeah. And then, and that's sort of every time I've heard Alicia Keys since then, I feel like take us straight back to... I'm sure if you talk about partners,
PTSD of
the same.
Keys.
Yes, and it was just playing constantly up until the point of the birth. But as I say, it then happened quite quickly. The kind of one of the key points was that so my partner's just in, she was, and I know everybody who goes through a kind of childbirth, you realise watching it, because you've kind of got this first-hand view of everything happening, how unbelievably amazing a woman is doing that. You're kind of impressed anyway throughout the pregnancy about all the things that she's gone through. But really, at that moment, just everything that you think, the strength that she's got to keep going. But she decided that she didn't want any kind of like proper pain relief. So the only pain relief that she had to start with was just gas and air, but she said she didn't want an epidural. So, which was obviously for her, it was obviously, incredibly hard, but also for me watching, it was, I remember at one point, me and the midwife sort of saying, "Are you sure you don't want something else? Because we don't really think this is working. And you're clearly in a lot of pain and discomfort." But so eventually, she agreed to have the pethidine, but that ended up being administered quite late in the labour process. So I think it didn't really have it hadn't really kicked in by the time that baby was born. But it then potentially has an impact further down the line, as we'll kind of talk about. But yes, so things were kind of slow, and then suddenly very quick, and then we got very close to the actual birth.
Okay, so what was the actual birth like?
So little girl was born at, I think it was 9 a.m. So it's a long labour.
It's very long, because you said you arrived at the hospital on the 30th of August.
So the night, everything just seemed to happen at night. So this is, again, like nobody has any sleep at all. Always seems to be the way. We arrived the night of the 30th. We then spent the whole day of the 31st in hospital. But I also, again, going back to the kind of the date, I remember when it ticked over to midnight. So it was the 1st of September. I thought, yes, this is it. We've made it. We've made it. No, it's terrible, really.
Start of the year, baby. Yes.
Yeah, I know. But that's a kind of have to be honest. That is what I was thinking at the time. Like, yes, we made it to the 1st. Okay. Little did I realise, in the future, that's actually going to cost me another year's worth of nursery fees. But there you go.
Oh yeah, you didn't know that.
That's what I thought at the time. Amazing. When she was born, getting to hold her, I've still got all the photos. I think when we realised we didn't have a hat for her, so they gave us one of like the little, the kind of hospital made hats that I think people knit and donate. So everything was wonderful. Obviously, my partner was incredibly tired, and I remember taking our daughter off to get kind of have the little test done. I remember kind of wheeling her and thinking, "Wow, this is it. She's really here." But again, another kind of detail about, again, how amazing like my partner is. So we were in the process of selling our flat right at that moment because we wanted to buy somewhere bigger to live. She got a call from the estate agent about an hour after she'd given birth. So I remember talking to the estate agent because there was supposed to be a viewing that day. People were going to our flat to have a look at it. And it was something that like our respective mums eventually kind of showed people around the flat. But, she was sort of instantly gone back into this kind of business like, right, okay, this is what's happening. But throughout the day of the 1st, everything was great at that point.
So at what point did things change? We
all stayed in overnight. And this is where, so my partner and the baby moved to like a separate bed. And I think I went home again. I came back with more things. And that's when you really realize there's no space for you. So you sort of got this chair, or I remember sat there and, but yeah, they kept them in overnight. So we're on the morning of the second day, so the 2nd of September. I've got this photo of my partner and the baby and our daughter. They're both sleeping. There's a white muslin that's like draped on my partner's shoulder, and like daughter sleeping on it. And I remember taking that photo thinking, this is wonderful. But it was that muslin that then sometime in the morning of the 2nd is when we noticed it was green, and it was kind of covered in this kind of green kind of mucus, sick, something that wasn't right. So we then kind of told the midwife, what's this doesn't look right. Then everything seemed to happen in a kind of a blur at that point, in that they came to have a look, and I think somebody else came to have a look, and they said, oh, let's take her for some kind of tests. And I remember her kind of being like transferred to an incubator. Obviously she was like awake and like very upset, my daughter, and it seemed to happen very, very quickly that we were then told, we don't know what the problem is, but she needs to be moved to a more specialist hospital for
immediately
moved, because the hospital that we'd been in was our local hospital where we'd kind of been going, but that didn't have the kind of the specialist facilities. Fortunately, there's one only a few miles away that she could be transferred to. But so suddenly she's in this incubator. She was kind of being put in the back of an ambulance. My partner was allowed to go with her in the ambulance, and I was told, just follow behind. So, I remember thinking, right, well, that's it. Like, we've got to go. I remember like calling my sister and telling her what had happened. My sister sort of lived like locally at the time, and that was the time I was really upset, thinking, I don't know what's happening here. And I remember like crying on the phone to my sister. Anyway, got in the car. And I was following the ambulance. The ambulance got its like emergency lights on. It's a particularly busy drive from that hospital to the hospital she was being moved to. And I remember following this ambulance thinking, I'm going to lose this ambulance at some point, because that can just kind of plow a furrow through the traffic, whereas I'm kind of struggling through. Anyway, I think I eventually lost it, but arrived eventually at the hospital and found where they were. And so my daughter was instantly moved to intensive care. All these kind of terms that you don't imagine that you'll ever come across. I'd never been in intensive care. I didn't really know people who had been, and you always imagine the absolute worst as soon as you hear about anybody being in intensive care. Something really serious has happened.
And at this point, they had not mentioned what their concerns were. It was just a case of, it is too severe. We can't keep her in the hospital we currently are at.
Yes.
We need to move her.
Yes, absolutely. I think they didn't really know, but they as a, I'm sure the kind of the right thing to do was to think, well, there's, a specialist facility nearby, we'll take her there. And I think because she was kind of 3.5 weeks early as well, she was not tiny, but she was 5'5" when she was, so yeah, 5 pounds. So quite small. But yeah, so but they didn't know. They didn't know what had happened. But she was not like feeding. She was not taking on any milk. So they kind of wanted to obviously have a look to see what like the issue might be. But that kind of, for the rest of that day, was just, a blur, really, trying to remember what happened that day. I remember thinking, this is such a, it's almost surreal that we were kind of there. Yeah, that's that's where we were for quite a long time. But yeah, it was also, my role was also to look after my partner who'd just been through this, this exhausting kind of labor. She's obviously also like sick with worry, really tired, had a kind of her own sort of, she needed kind of looking after as well. She needed like still medical attention. So it was just all kind of a surreal blur at that point.
So take me through it. So at this point, your partner is now sort of registered into this new hospital.
Yes.
The baby goes to intensive care. So are they separated?
Yeah.
Do they stay together? They're separated.
Separated. So baby was in ICU, intensive care unit. So my partner she could sort of, eventually like just move around like me, but like baby was kind of kept in, it was in an incubator. And that was what we could go in and take her out at times. But we were kind of separated while she was being kind of cared for. They didn't know what the problem was, but we got into this sort of period of them trying to. She was on a drip. Them trying to kind of give her milk, through just like going directly into her stomach. But every time they would try this, or they'd kind of go, right, we're going to try 2.5 milliliters. That was a kind of the small amount, 2.5 milliliters, 5 milliliters. We'll see if she digests it. Every time they kind of checked, she hadn't digested it, and the only thing that she had come back was this kind of green, like the aspirates they called it. It's the first time I'd ever heard that word, and probably the last. I've never used it since then. But aspirates suddenly became this like critical thing that was happening. That I remember all we would do was just pray, like for right. They're trying to give us some milk. Let's see if she actually digests it, and just sitting there for a few hours thinking, right, what are they going to come back with? And then they check and they could see she hadn't digested anything. And the only thing that's been produced was this kind of like green sort of mucousy stuff. So it was, obviously just a very worrying time. Just pretty awful at that point.
How long did it take them to identify what the issue is? Because clearly she was not able to feed, meaning that assumingly she was not getting her strength, which is what you want to see with a newborn baby.
Yeah. So there were kind of a few small signs of progress. So I remember at one point, the kind of the meconium plug sort of, she finally, did this big poo with meconium, and everybody thought this is great. Shows that at this point they thought a digestive system just wasn't working at all. But this had happened, and it kind of gave a bit of encouragement that, okay, things are perhaps working. Maybe it was just a blockage. Maybe it was her digestive system's just not working at this point, but it's slowly like warming up. Eventually, and again, I sort of, I look back through like all the constant updates I was giving in the sort of WhatsApp group. I look back through that to see like what was happening, and it's all like quite detailed. But eventually, I think there was this one breakthrough where she suddenly had digested like 2.5 milliliters of milk, which was, that was suddenly, it felt like the most amazing thing, because it sort of showed something was going right. This was after 2 or 3 days of just sort of waiting and hoping that she was going to start digesting. Once that had happened and they were sort of thought she was stabilized a little bit, she was moved out of ICU and was taken to the high dependency unit. So still like in an incubator and still going through the same kind of processes, but they obviously were still trying to work out what the problem was, and there were various tests that they were doing, but they still didn't really know like what the issue was. they never did find out. There was never any definitive answer about what had actually happened.
Oh, okay.
Which, so when people ask, "Oh, what was it?" Eventually, we actually say, "Well, we don't really know. We can kind of guess." Sometimes I guess you realise that for the amazing, how amazing medical science is, sometimes they just don't know, just don't know why things happen, and they never did find out really what had happened.
Okay, we'll go back to that. But I'm wondering, during all that, first of all, how long did that last?
She was in hospital so she was born on the 1st of September. We came out with her on the 14th of September.
Okay.
So it was 2 weeks of us like living in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So we were initially put in a room opposite the like ICU that they let parents use, but only like for one night. They've seen people will then go. It's just somewhere for them to rest. There's like a shower there. Very basic, not particularly nice, but it was all what we needed. We were put in a room. Then when she was still in ICU and then in a high dependency unit, we had a night in. There was like a flat that was used that they gave to staff. Like staff could use this kind of block of flats. So we had like a room there, and then we came back out of there, and they put us into another room in the hospital. So it was. I mean, the hospital were just amazing, and that meant we had kind of had access. We could kind of sort of sleep, and then in the middle of the night, go in, see her, see how she was doing. The nurses must have thought, this kind of bleary-eyed people just wandering in, come straight from their bed and then just come in and like have a look. And so yeah, that's how long we were there for in total.
And so you were able to be there for the full length of your baby stay, or did you go home every now and then, or did you have family maybe bring you clothes, food?
Yes, a bit of everything. So obviously I'd still got, the car. So I would go back every so often, get like more supplies. And then like our parents had come. So my partner's mom and her sister had come. My sister, my mum came down, got on the train. It was like a few hours journey, but she came down. So they were all amazing. So I was sort of going home, like replenishing. I remember that drive between the hospital and home, sort of 40 minutes of like fairly kind of grinding drive through a kind of a busy city. But, doing that quite a lot and then coming back. There were some kind of amusing moments in that. I remember going back and like batch cooking a load of like chili con carne. So we could eat something nice, because there was a kind of a family room that you could use at a microwave. So I remember coming back and like batch cooking all of this and putting it in the fridge and thinking, that'll do us for a couple of days. And of course, I didn't label it. So the cleaners came in the next day, saw this unlabeled food, and just binned it all.
Oh, no.
So I remember going to the kitchen and going, like, where's all the food? Oh, yeah, so the cleaners must have binned it because, it wasn't labeled.
This is enough to break a man.
So that was, you have to sort of laugh at that kind of thing. But yeah, it was very strange. It was very, very odd. For the first 4 or 5 days, kind of like genuinely kind of like scary and awful and really worrying, and traumatic. And then when she eventually started to digest a little bit more, then it sort of transferred into this sort of slightly frustrating, we don't really know what's going on still. We don't know how long we're going to be here. We still don't really know what the problem is or was. And then we kind of get to a point where we thought we might be okay to think about leaving. And then they suddenly said, oh, we're going to do a test for cystic fibrosis just to rule that out. And then we thought, oh gosh, it can't be that. Surely not. That would be, that's obviously not the kind of news that you want to hear. But
sorry, what is cystic fibrosis?
So cystic fibrosis is it's a hereditary disease that I think affects like your breathing and your digestive system. And because she was having like problems digesting milk, that must be why they thought, well, we'll test for this as well. They hadn't done it initially, but then they decided, well, that might be it, just to rule it out. So they kind of go through all of that as well. And of course, every time you're just thinking, you're just sort of at the mercy of just waiting results. You go through like kind of shifts of nurses. So you'll get a nurse and, they're absolutely unbelievable. So good and like patient and like reassuring. And they do their shift for like 9 hours. And, you feel like, oh, we're in safe hands here. This is fantastic. And then they swap shifts. And they weren't always like that. So you get another nurse. I remember one who, they were weighing like our daughter to see if she put any weight, and they like weighed her with her nappy on. And we thought, why are you weighing her with a nappy on? She wasn't weighed with a nappy on previously. It's still like amazing what they were doing, but not quite as good or reassuring. And then you think, gosh, we've got like 9 hours of this now, kind of slightly panicky, whilst we're sort of at the mercy of this particular nurse. And then somebody else will come on and they'd be brilliant again. And you just kind of lived your life in these sorts of cycles of just utterly dependent on other people. Yeah, it was a kind of a sort of a surreal. We just got like used to living in a hospital, which was very good. To start seeing like the same parents coming in who also had like premature babies. And, you'd kind of, get to know them and get to see them. And it was a very sort of strange existence while everything else is sort of going on the outside world. And you're living in this kind of like hospital village.
Mm. So what decided it in the end? What was the reason why you were allowed to leave the hospital?
So eventually she started to kind of digest more. They wanted to see her kind of drinking the milk and putting on more weight. So eventually, because again, she was like my partner's breast milk hadn't come through straight away. So she was trying to like harvest colostrum for a while, but our baby was being fed on the banked milk that gets donated to the hospital. Which was amazing. Again, it's something I just didn't know existed at all. But, before, if your milk is struggling to come through, then, you've got access to this kind of bank of, of milk, which was what she was being fed on, like initially, whilst my partner's milk started to come through. So they wanted to see her being fed. They wanted to be content that she was kind of taking milk, that she was latching on, and therefore then she was actually putting on weight. So that was just, we'd moved in away from the, this is acutely concerning, to when will this end? When we'll be allowed to go home? I mentioned that she'd had this sort of cystic fibrosis test. The result of that never came back. There was, again, it wasn't kind of ruled out, but there were so many of those kind of episodes where they would just say, "Oh, just one more thing. We'll do one more thing. Just test one more thing," and then the time sort of drags on. And there were days around the kind of the 10th and the 11th when I thought, well, we're never going to get out of here. We're just in here all the time.
This is it. We're moving here. Do you know what? We're selling the flat and we're moving into the hospital.
Yes. Yeah. This exactly. this is it. This is it. We'll just buy a property here. It's quite nice to look after us at least. But it was. I have been in hospital previously, for a kind of a minor operation, and I remember the same kind of feeling where you don't think you're ever going to get out because everything happens so slowly. So, somebody will come round and say, "Yeah, you should be fine now." Somebody will come round and like discharge you, but they don't, like for hours, and you're sat there for hours and hours and hours thinking, like, when is this going to happen? And you start to see why, if you're quite kind of passive or perhaps you don't have the the kind of the I don't know, the kind of the social capital or the confidence to sort of keep pressing and going, okay, is somebody going to discharge me? You know, you can see if you just sit there and let things happen, perhaps we'll never get out because they'll just forget about us. Of course, they will remember eventually, but you know, you start to think, right, I need to go keep asking and anyway, keep finding stuff out. But of course, everything was being done like for the right reasons. All the precautions were kind of being used, and you know, the whole place, the whole hospital, the whole kind of, you know, the treatment that our daughter got was just, you know, out of this world. It was so amazing. And the way they looked after us as well. There was a place, I think it's called like the Ronald McDonald House, which so you know the kind of the charity that helps kind of families when, you know, when they've just given birth. And there was this entire unit in the hospital where they would have like donated sandwiches from, you know, places like Subway and Pret and those kind of high street places. People would bring them in and you could go in there and just kind of help yourself to kind of food and drink, and all done through sort of like volunteering. And, you know, it was an amazing charity, and things like that just made you realize how amazing people are, or the system is or can be, or people are kind of willing to kind of like give you a helping hand, the things that are there for you that if you've not been through that, you just don't think those things exist. You just think you're sort of in and out, and, you know, it's just a fairly cold process. But there are so many things there that offer you that kind of support and that just make you kind of eternally grateful afterwards that they are there.
Yeah, there is still goodness in there. Still goodness in this world. That's good. So, so you finally come out. The day comes. The day finally arrives. You come out. Tell me, how does that go?
It was an incredible feeling that it was like, it's really going to happen. I remember this. Again, one of these sort of slightly kind of amusing, chaotic moments where we've got loads of stuff there by this stage because we've been there for ages. So we've got all these various things, and where we were was quite far away from like the car park and where the car was. So I remember like one of the nurses attempting to be helpful and saying, "We'll give you this trolley and you can put all your stuff on it and then wheel it to the car." And so I thought, okay, that's helpful. I can put all this stuff on it. But this trolley is this really flimsy. It's meant just to sort of go indoors in hospital, not meant to go like cobbles outside. So I was wheeling it to the car thinking, oh, this stuff is going to fall off. This is really not helpful at all. I don't know why I've done this, but, you know, wheeling this really flimsy trolley through, it's about to collapse. By this stage, our daughter had been allowed to stay with us in the room for like a couple of days, and like, you know, so we were sleeping in the same room as her. I think, you know, at this point, it really kind of hit home to me, like how, you know, it never stops. So, you know, as terrible as like the early days were in like ICU, she'd be in her incubator and you kind of, right, you know, you can kind of see her, the drips on, she's kind of being fed through that. And then you just sit there, you just go, you know, you're still separate slightly. But then when that ends, all that dependency on the kind of the drip ends, and then the dependency is then on you. So you're constantly there. And it was at that point I realized this is fully 24/7. There is no kind of break. And you kind of know that in your own mind in advance, but not only when like the reality really hits do you realize, oh, apart from when she's sleeping, this kind of never stops. And when she stayed with us for those first couple of nights we were all in the same room, I think that was when I realized that, yeah, this is going to be the reality from now on. But yeah, it was such a wonderful moment when we finally got to put her in the car seat. I had to have all of that ready, and they were finally happy that she was feeding and sort of putting on weight, and eventually we were allowed to go. so that almost feels like it should have been a kind of like the end a little bit. It wasn't, because she then didn't, for the first couple of months, like she didn't really put on really any weight at all, and she was very kind of small. And I look back at some of the photos now from like the first couple of months of her, and she's just looks incredibly like frail. And at the time, we sort of knew that it wasn't, she should be putting on more. But those first kind of few weeks and couple of months were kind of amazing, because she was at home, we were all together, but also slightly concerning again that she wasn't kind of putting on the weight.
So what did that mean? Does that mean that you were you fully discharged from the hospital when you left, or were they waiting to see consistent progress with her weight gain?
So we were discharged, but then the aftercare was still quite close. She was still being monitored quite close. I guess you get the health visitor sort of coming out, and like I think the aftercare generally for my daughter was excellent. That was really good. The aftercare for my partner it almost felt like they'd sort of forgotten a bit about her, because everything had just been overtaken by, the concern for the baby. And it felt like in the transfer between hospitals, almost as if something had been like lost somewhere, like some file on her or something, that meant that they just had almost been like overlooked. And, because she'd had gestational diabetes that was diagnosed in the kind of the run up, quite late in the pregnancy, but a few weeks beforehand. And there should have been more aftercare for that, which I think sort of went missing a little bit. And it was almost as if they just sort of gone, or it just got lost in the system somewhere. But yeah, the aftercare for my daughter was great. But it was just a very kind of slow, long building up of her size. But when eventually she did start to put on more weight, it felt like such an amazing breakthrough.
Yeah. And so would you say this is where the sort of NICU story ends? Is that when she is at this point sort of 3 months old, 2 months old?
Yes. Yeah. It was. So she was exclusively breastfed until I think when she was still a couple of months old, and then we decided to like mix. So she'd be breastfed, but also she had some bottle feeding. And at that point, so that meant that I could kind of help more and I could do more feeding. But eventually that sort of seemed to help her like put on more weight as we do this kind of combi feeding. But yes, that was it felt like that was the point when, okay, even though it was never fully disclosed what the kind of the problem was or what had happened. The best guess that was kind of given to us that it was just, well, because she just wasn't ready. She wasn't ready to come out.
Was a bit early.
Things weren't working as well as they should have been. And 7 years later, she's going strong, and you would never know. You never know. And she doesn't really know that this happened, or that she doesn't really appreciate like what she'd been through. But I'm sure at some point she'll understand more.
That's fantastic. So 7 years later, and you're in a house full of girls. Yeah. 2 girls and a woman.
Yes.
What's it like?
It's great. It's brilliant. It's people every so often, and they say this to me, like my partner as well. They'll say, "Oh, why don't you have a third? Then you can have a boy." As if that's sort of how it works. As if you just go, right. Okay,
oh yeah, sure. Try for a third. It's going to be a third.
We'll just press the boy button this time, and that's what's going to happen. But never at any point have I thought, oh, I miss kind of like having, or, I really want. I remember when our second, when we found out our second child was going to be a girl, I remember thinking, great, I know how that works. I know how to look after them because I've been looking after this one. So I remember thinking, okay, that's good. But yeah, it's a kind of a amazing, sort of slightly kind of chaotic, but wonderful existence. I'm still waiting for the moment when they stop thinking, oh, he's, my dad is this sort of funny, sort of, a guy that we like kind of playing with, to he's just such an embarrassment. Why is he doing? Or
but would it be just girls? Would it not be boys as well?
I suspect both, yes.
I think it's a kid-parent thing. It's like, oh gosh, no, so embarrassing. Please drop me off.
And there are occasional moments when. So this was before COVID. So our daughter was 18 months old when lockdown happened. So we got, like, she was going to nursery, but nursery closed. So we got to spend a lot of time with her, and I got to spend a lot of time with her. Both me and my partner work condensed hours. So it means we do like work 5 days in 4. So we would have a day each with our like a daughter, our eldest initially, and then we did the same for our second daughter. So that was, even though that was kind of, it was exhausting, and it was very tiring because you're sort of doing a full-time job and then having a day where you're just looking after a fairly like dependent child. It was also amazing because of the time you get to spend with them and the bond that you build. And especially during lockdown, when there was nowhere else to go at all, you sort of get that very close bond. And so then, therefore, when she's now slightly a bit older, it's sort of occasionally when she'll sort of like say she's into something, and I think, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that program is or that music is. I don't know. And this happened a couple of times, and I think that is just going to be the kind of the way it is in the future. There'll be more things that she'll go, oh, I really love this now. And I think, yeah, I don't understand that at all. Even if you think, oh yeah, I know what like kids like. I know what that kind of they do. And then suddenly this will happen, and you think, I've got no sense of what this is at all. I don't get it in any way. I've never heard of it. You gradually sort of feel yourself becoming slightly less kind of relevant to like what young people are into.
Brilliant. Well, I think that probably, naturally takes us to the end of the conversation, us being more irrelevant as time goes by.
Yes. That's something to look forward to.
Exactly. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, that you'd like to share now that you've been through this experience, whether, the whole NICU experience, or just in general, something that you'd like to share, with the next dad, the next Liam, who's expecting his first baby?
Yeah, I think, it's like sort of tell people who are expecting like their first, it's the best thing that you'll kind of ever do. And and that doesn't mean that if people don't have kids or choose not to have kids, that, their life is in any way diminished or they're missing out. I would never say to anybody who's not got a child, oh, you're not going to have children. People have got all kinds of reasons why they don't. But for me, it was just, an amazing sort of fulfillment, and something that you've almost got like two people. There's that in your mind, there's that person that you were before having children, and all the things that you used to do, perhaps a slightly selfish way that you used to exist, lots of things that you took for granted, lots of sort of freedoms that you just don't have. In some ways, I always think there's like a parallel universe where, when our daughter didn't come early, and that person who went to bed on that night of the 30th, who was just thinking about work the next day, just went to work and did, had another 3 weeks of like before having kids. But Everything sort of changes for the better, and the kind of the family time that you then have, and whatever else bad might happen in your kind of like your day, or if work's not been great, or if other things aren't great, you've always got that kind of unconditional love from them. Like, they don't care like what's happened, like, you know, in your kind of workplace or anything like that, or if there are wider things in the world, like they don't understand. They just kind of there, and they kind of give you that kind of happiness. I remember one of the things I do remember from NCT was the kind of the person who was leading it said, what is your kind of ideal vision of, like, when you've had a child, what fast forward a few years, what ideally do you want to kind of see? And I remember saying, I want that sort of that feeling of getting home from somewhere, getting home from work or whatever, and kind of walking in, and then like your kids running towards you, like going like "Daddy," and like giving you a hug, and that happens. That, you know, that still happens, and you know, that's the sort of the most amazing thing, when that kind of, you know, that just sort of makes it all kind of worth it. Obviously, 5 minutes later, they're driving you mad, but you know, you still get that moment of like bliss when you think these people are genuinely happy to see me. You know, it's not often you kind of get that in life. So, so it's great. You know, whoever's sort of the next person coming along, you know, you'll love it.
I'm loving that. I think that's a very strong way to end your story. Thank you so much for your time, Liam.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Liam's story is such an important reminder that becoming a parent isn't only happening in the delivery room. Sometimes it happens in corridors, waiting rooms, and NICU units, in moments where you're trying to be strong, present, and useful, without always knowing what your role is yet. Hearing this experience from a dad's perspective adds another layer to the conversation around birth, emergencies, and early parenthood. And I'm really grateful to Liam for sharing it so openly. You'll find more information and resources mentioned in the show notes. And as always, thank you so much for listening to Raising with the Village. Raising with the Village will now be released every other Thursday, giving me the space to keep bringing you thoughtful and honest conversations. You can find all past episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever you usually listen. And you can follow the show there, so new episodes land straight into your feed. If you'd like to get in touch, share feedback, or suggest a story, you can find me on Instagram at Raising with the Village. I always love hearing from you. And if this podcast has resonated with you, one of the best ways to support it is by subscribing, rating, leaving a review, or sharing an episode with someone who might need it. It truly makes a difference and helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for being part of the village, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.